We've had no compliance issues with Mr. Zimmerman since he's been re-released. We've not had one problem with him.
Okay. Any problems with him doing whatever it is you asked him to do?
No, sir.
Any concerns with his willingness to, for example, appear in court, to comply with your conditions, and to live within the confines of the GPS monitoring?
No, sir. He's demonstrated complete compliance in regards to GPS monitoring.
Welcome back to In Session. I'm Danny Cevallos. GPS monitoring. It's an interesting area. It's only allowed through technology, and there are pros and cons. The pros are a defendant gets to come out, not be in custody, and assist with his defense. I can't tell you how critical that is. It's not easy to prepare for trial when I have to drive up to the prison to talk to my guy. What are the cons? Well, critics say, look, just because I know where a guy is doesn't mean he can't commit another crime. I want to bring in criminal defense investigator Charles Mittelstadt, who has extensive experience in GPS and other kinds of electronic monitoring. Welcome, Charles. I want to talk to you about this. I mean, I see it on my end. A lot of times GPS comes up when my client gets called back into court because he's violated. And every time they swear up and down, I didn't violate, I didn't violate. And I say, did you go out on your porch? Did you take out the garbage? Have you left? So I genuinely want to know, when they're saying that GPS is lying, who's telling the truth? How accurate is this GPS?
Well, it's has relatively good reliability. It's generally reliable within about 3 meters of accuracy. It is, and like any technology, it's not infallible. I mean, there can be some glitches, there can be some problems, but there are also safeguards associated with it. There are a variety of different alarms. So if a defendant attempts to try to cut their bracelet off, goes outside of a certain radius, the technology is really evolving. It used to be, when it came to electronic monitoring, some type of pretrial monitoring, that it was more of a radius based before we got into the whole GPS aspect of it, which meant that there was basically a base station, and if a defendant went outside of a radius, that radius could be 50 yards, 100 yards, that it would set it off. Now, almost all electronic monitoring is done with the use of GPS simply because it's a superior technology, it's prevalent, and it does enable defendants more latitude to be able to go to their attorney's office, for example, and assist in their own defense, to be able to make court appearances, to go to maybe their probation officer, to get an evaluation, whatever the case may be. So there's a high level of detail, but it is not infallible. There can be glitches, but there are backup controls that can be put in place to try to verify that.
Okay, I want to show our viewers a picture of an actual GPS so they know what we're dealing with, so they know that it's really compelling because it's smaller than a cell phone. There we have a picture right there. Tell us what we're looking at, Charles.
That's your traditional ankle monitor. Again, those devices, they all kind of resemble themselves. At the point when it was what I was referring to, more of a radius-based non-GPS device, it still looked basically the same. And now GPS-enabled ankle monitors essentially look just like that, but they enable so much more detail and so much more ability to see the activity levels and actually see movement within confined areas and so forth.
Okay, so you see that strap there. I know that you can probably cut that off with just a regular pair of scissors. What happens, because I mean, I got to tell you, again, I hear the end result when GPS goes wrong and people cut these things off and they somehow think that they can get away with that nonsense, and maybe throw it on a moving by pickup truck, and it'll just show them driving around. What happens when you cut that little band?
It's going to set an alarm off.
There's wiring running through it?
There are sensors within the band, and when those sensors have been interrupted, it's going to send off an alarm to the monitoring company, and all bells and whistles are going to go off, and things are going to terrible for the defendant.
Now, we've looked here at a GPS. That's from the side of the defendant, but I want our viewers to get an idea of who's watching back at the base.
Sure.
We've got an image here of a map that will show up when people are tracking, when probation is tracking someone on GPS. Tell me what we're looking at there. It looks a little like Google Earth, but there are some major differences.
Yeah, if you look to the left hand side of the screen, you'll see that there's a listing there, and what that has is it's a log, a movement log. Now this is actually a vehicle. This is a screenshot of a vehicle that's being tracked. Now tracking a vehicle or tracking a person is the same technology, really almost identical type of device, and it's just in this case this happens to represent a vehicle being tracked. But if you look to the left-hand side of the screen, you see actual activity, date, times that correspond with certain locations, start movement, stop movement, even speeds.
So it'll tell us actual starting and stopping where people stayed for a particular time.
That's right. I mean, you can slice and dice the information any way you want. You can have as much or as little detail as you want. You can also have a path. You can show, in this case, a vehicle path, and if you notice on the image itself, it shows where the vehicle started, the path that it traveled, and when it stopped, and the date and times that correspond with that. You also see some shaded areas there, and so you can set up actual alert zones around anything. You can change the size of the alert zone, put it wherever you want.
I want to talk about alerts. When it comes to alerts, a lot of people criticize GPS. They say it's only as powerful as whoever's watching it. After all, if no one's back there at the base checking out what's going on, what's the point to an alert? I get these questions all the time. What can people, first of all, is anybody watching back at the base? I mean, is that a safe assumption?
No, there's no way. It would be physically impossible to monitor these things live. So it's all about what we call exception reports. You know, this technology is used prevalently with all sorts of applications. Teen tracking, for an example. No parent would possibly have the time to monitor their child's activity. So what you do is you set up these exception reports. It could be a speed. If a vehicle travels over a particular speed, it generates an alert. It generates a report. If they go inside a particular alert zone, go outside a particular alert zone, it's going to set off an alarm. It's going to generate a text message. It's going to generate an alert. In the case of monitoring a defendant, you have, just like you have in the case of alarm systems, you have a control center, and they're monitoring literally hundreds, thousands of different units, and so they are dependent upon an alert going up and an exception report being generated.
Let me ask you this, because let's dispel some of the myths here with GPS, because I get these questions all the time. Number one, can you take a shower with a GPS? How do you do that?
Sure. I mean, these devices are designed, obviously, to stay on the ankle, to be almost impossible to remove without generating an alert, and so they have to be sealed. They are water resistant, waterproof. They're not, waterproof to 100 feet, but they are water resistant, so you could certainly shower in them. You could maybe even go in a pool. Again, pools aren't something that judges are real concerned about when they're issuing bonds and the conditions of their bond and so forth. But yeah, these devices are very, very sophisticated now, Danny. I mean, these devices are used in cases of DUIs, and they can actually monitor alcohol levels.
I want to talk about that very briefly. I mean, this isn't an issue with George Zimmerman so much, but Lindsay Lohan, apparently there's technology that can not only tell someone where you are, but if you had a shot of Kahlua in the last 2 hours or something, that's
well, actually,
mind-blowing.
in Zimmerman's case, it is an issue because, now I don't know that he's actually fitted with a device that is capable of monitoring, any alcohol or drug content, but as I recall reading, part of the conditions of his bond are that he is not allowed to consume any alcohol or any drugs. And so now that may be an issue when he goes to meet with his monitoring company, that they may test him for that separately. But there are devices that are specifically designed to monitor that very thing, any kind of drug or alcohol use.
How about flying? A lot of people, I mean, obviously if you're on GPS, you probably have some restrictions on travel, but when I'm on the airplane and they tell me to turn off all my electronic devices, how does that work if someone needs to be transported?
Well, that's going to be done generally with a court order, with the permission of the Department of Corrections. I mean, that's a highly monitored operation to have someone who's allowed to get on a plane. I mean, that's something that's been pre-designated. There's an exception that's been put in place where you expect not to have contact with that particular defendant. Or a parolee or probationer that you might be monitoring for some period of time. If you go inside a building, inside of a parking deck, it's going to generate an alert. It's line of sight with regard to the GPS satellites. I mean, it was, these things weren't designed to go through concrete bunkers.
All right, Charles Mittelstadt, thank you for joining and teaching us a little about GPS.